22. Red Dog, Part 3. He moved, Bandar log fashion, into the next tree, and so on into the next and the next, the pack following with lifted hungry heads. Now and then he would pretend to fall, and the pack would tumble one over the other in their haste to be at the death. It was a curious sight, the boy with the knife that shone in the low sunlight as it sifted through the upper branches, and the silent pack with their red coats all aflame, huddling and following below. When he came to the last tree he took the garlic and rubbed himself all over carefully, and the dholes yelled with scorn. "Ape with wolf's tongue, dost thou think to cover thy scent?" they said. "We follow to the death." "Take thy tail," said Mowgli, flinging it back along the course he had taken. The pack instinctively rushed after it, and follow now to the death. He had slipped down the tree trunk and headed like the wind in bare feet for the Bee Rocks, before the dholes saw what he would do. They gave one deep howl, and settled down to the long, lobbing canter that can at the last run down anything that runs. Mowgli knew their pack pace to be much slower than that of the wolves, or he would never have risked a 2-mile run in full sight. They were sure that the boy was theirs at last, and he was sure that he held them to play with as he pleased. All his trouble was to keep them sufficiently hot behind him to prevent their turning off too soon. He ran cleanly, evenly, and springily, the tailless leader not 5 yards behind him, and the pack tailing out over perhaps a quarter of a mile of ground, crazy and blind with the rage of slaughter. So he kept his distance by ear, reserving his last effort for the rush across the Bee Rocks. The Little People had gone to sleep in the early twilight, for it was not the season of late blossoming flowers, but as Mowgli's first footfalls rang hollow on the hollow ground he heard a sound as though all the earth were humming. Then he ran as he had never run in his life before, spurned aside 1, 2, 3 of the piles of stones into the dark, sweet-smelling gullies, heard a roar like the roar of the sea in a cave, saw with the tail of his eye their air growing dark behind him, saw the current of the Waingunga far below, and a flat, diamond-shaped head in the water, leaped outward with all its strength, the tailless dhole snapping at his shoulder in mid-air, and dropped feet first to the safety of the river, breathless and triumphant. There was not a sting upon him, for the smell of the garlic had checked the Little People for just the few seconds that he was among them. When he rose Kaa's coils were steadying him and things were bounding over the edge of the cliff, great lumps, it seemed, of clustered bees falling like plummets. But before any lump touched water, the bees flew upward and the body of a dhole whirled downstream. Overhead they could hear furious short yells that were drowned in a roar like breakers, the roar of the wings of the Little People of the Rocks. Some of the dholes, too, had fallen into the gullies that communicated with the underground caves, and there choked and fought and snapped among the tumbled honeycombs, and at last, borne up, even when they were dead, on the heaving waves of bees beneath them, shot out of some hole in the river face, to roll over on the black rubbish heaps. There were dholes who had leaped short into the trees on the cliffs, and the bees blotted out their shapes, but the greater number of them, maddened by the stings, had flung themselves into the river, and, as Kaa said, the Waingunga was hungry water. Kaa held Mowgli fast till the boy had recovered his breath. "We may not stay here," he said. "The Little People are roused indeed. Come!" Swimming low and diving as often as he could, Mowgli went down the river, knife in hand. "Slowly, slowly," said Kaa. "One tooth does not kill 100, unless it be a cobra's." And many of the dholes took water swiftly when they saw the Little People rise. "The more work for my knife, then." Pah! How the Little People follow! Mowgli sank again. The face of the water were blanketed with wild bees, buzzing sullenly and stinging all they found. "Nothing was ever yet lost by silence," said Kaa. "No sting could penetrate his scales. And thou haste all the long night for the hunting. Hear them howl!" Nearly half the Pack had seen the trap their fellows rushed into, and turning sharp aside, had flung themselves into the water where the gorge broke down in steep banks. Their cries of rage and their threats against the tree ape who had brought them to their shame mixed with the yells and growls of those who had been punished by the Little People. To remain ashore was death, and every dhole knew it. Their pack was swept along the current, down to the deep eddies of the Peace Pool, but even there the angry Little People followed and forced them to the water again. Mowgli could hear the voice of the tailless leader bidding his people hold on and kill out every wolf in Seeonee, but he did not waste his time in listening. "One kills in the dark behind us," snapped a dhole. "Here is tainted water." Mowgli had dived forward like an otter, twitching a struggling dhole under water before he could open his mouth, and dark rings rose as the body plopped up, turning on its side. The dholes tried to turn, but the current prevented them, and the Little People darted at the heads and ears, and they could hear the challenge of the Seeonee pack growing louder and deeper in the gathering darkness. Again Mowgli dived, and again a dhole went under and rose dead, and again the clamour broke out at the rear of the pack, some howling that it was best to go ashore, others calling on their leader to lead them back to the Dekkan, and others bidding Mowgli show himself and be killed. "They come to fight with two stomachs and several voices," said Kaa. "The rest is with thy brethren below yonder. The Little People go back to sleep. They have chased us far. Now I too turn back, for I am not of one skin with any wolf. Good hunting, little brother, and remember the dhole bites low." A wolf came running along the bank on 3 legs, leaping up and down, laying his head sideways close to the ground, hunching his back, and breaking high into the air, as though he were playing with his cubs. It was Won tolla, the Outlier, and he said never a word. He continued his horrible sport beside the dholes. They had been long in the water now, and were swimming wearily, their coats drenched and heavy, their bushy tails dragging like sponges. So tired and shaken, they too were silent, watching the pair of blazing eyes that moved abreast. "This is no good hunting," said one, panting. "Good hunting," said Mowgli, as he rose boldly at the brute's side, and sent the long knife home behind the shoulder, pushing hard to avoid his dying snap. "Art thou there, Man cub?" said Won tolla across the water. "Ask of the dead, Outlier," Mowgli replied. "Have none come downstream? I have filled these dogs' mouths with dirt. I have tricked them into broad daylight, and their leader lacks his tail. But here be some few for thee still. Whither shall I drive them?" "I will wait," said Won tolla. "The night is before me. Nearer and nearer came the bay of the Seeonee wolves. For the pack, for the full pack it is met. And a bend in the river drove the dholes forward among the sands and shoals opposite the lairs. Then they saw their mistake. They should have landed half a mile higher up, and rushed the wolves on dry ground. Now it was too late. The bank was lined with burning eyes, and except for the horrible peal that had never stopped since sundown, there was no sound in the jungle. It seemed as though Wontolla were fawning on them to come ashore, and turn and take hold, said the leader of the dholes. The entire pack flung themselves at the shore, threshing and squattering through the shoal water, till the face of the Waingunga was all white and torn, and the great ripples went from side to side, like bow waves from a boat. Mowgli followed the rush, stabbing and slicing as the dholes, huddled together, rushed up the river beach in one wave. Then the long fight began, heaving and straining and splitting and scattering and narrowing and broadening along the red, wet sands, and over and between the tangled tree roots, and through and among the bushes, and in and out of the grass clumps, for even now the dholes were 2 to 1. But they met wolves fighting for all that made the pack, and not only the short, high, deep-chested, white-tusked hunters of the pack, but the anxious-eyed lahinis, the she-wolves of the lair, as the saying is, fighting for their litters, with here and there a yearling wolf, his first coat still half woolly, tugging and grappling by their sides. A wolf, you must know, flies at the throat or snaps at the flank, while a dhole, by preference, bites at the belly. So when the dholes were struggling out of the water and had to raise their heads, the odds were with the wolves. On dry land the wolves suffered, but in the water or ashore Mowgli's knife came and went without ceasing. The 4 had worried their way to his side. Grey Brother, crouched between the boy's knees, was protecting his stomach, while the others guarded his back and either side, or stood over him when the shock of a leaping, yelling dhole, who had thrown himself full on the steady blade, bore him down. For the rest, it was one tangled confusion, a locked and swaying mob that moved from right to left, and from left to right along the bank, and also ground round and round slowly on its own centre. Here would be a heaving mound, like a water blister in a whirlpool, which would break like a water blister, and throw up 4 or 5 mangled dogs, each striving to get back to the centre. Here would be a single wolf, borne down by 2 or 3 dholes, laboriously dragging them forward, and sinking the while. Here a yearling cub would be held up by the pressure round him, though he had been killed early, while his mother, crazed with dumb rage, rolled over and over, snapping and passing on, and in the middle of the thickest press, perhaps, 1 wolf and 1 dhole, forgetting everything else, would be manoeuvring for first hole, till they were whirled away by a rush of furious fighters. Once Mowgli passed Akela, a dhole on either flank, and his all but toothless jaws closed over the loins of a third, and once he saw Phao, his teeth set in the throat of a dhole, tugging the unwilling beast forward till the yearlings could finish him. But the bulk of the fight was blind flurry and smother in the dark, hit, trip, and tumble, yelp, groan, and worry, 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 round him and behind him and above him. As the night wore on, the quick, giddy go-round motion increased. The dholes were cowed and afraid to attack the stronger wolves, but did not yet dare to run away. Mowgli felt that the end was coming soon, and contented himself with striking merely to cripple. The yearlings were growing bolder. There was time now and again to breathe, and pass a word to a friend, and the mere flicker of the knife would sometimes turn a dog aside. "The meat is very near the bone," Grey Brother yelled. He was bleeding from a score of flesh wounds. "But the bone is yet to be cracked," said Mowgli. "Eewah! Thus do we do in the Jungle." The red blade ran like a flame along the side of a dhole whose hind quarters were hidden by the weight of a clinging wolf. "My kill!" snorted the wolf through his wrinkled nostrils. "Leave him to me." "Is thy stomach still empty, outlier?" said Mowgli. Won tolla was fearfully punished, but his grip had paralyzed the dhole, who could not turn round and reach him. "By the Bull that bought me," said Mowgli, with a bitter laugh, "it is the tailless one." And indeed it was the big bay coloured leader. "It is not wise to kill cubs and lahinis," Mowgli went on philosophically, wiping the blood out of his eyes, "unless one has also killed the outlier, and it is in my stomach that this Won tolla kills thee." A dhole leaped to his leader's aid, but before his teeth had found Won tolla's flank, Mowgli's knife was in his throat, and Grey Brother took what was left. "And thus do we do in the Jungle," said Mowgli. Won tolla said not a word, only his jaws were closing and closing on the backbone as his life ebbed. The dhole shuddered, his head dropped, and he lay still, and Won tolla dropped above him. "Ah, the blood debt is paid," said Mowgli. "Sing the song, Won tolla." "He hunts no more," said Grey Brother, "and Akela too is silent this long time." "The bone is cracked," thundered Phao, son of Poona. "They go. Kill! Kill out, O hunters of the Free People!" Dhole after dhole was slinking away from those dark and bloody sands to the river, to the thick Jungle, upstream or downstream, as he saw the road clear. "The debt! The debt!" shouted Mowgli. "Pay the debt! They have slain the Lone Wolf. Let not a dog go." He was flying to the river, knife in hand, to check any dhole who dared to take water, when, from under a mound of 9 dead, rose Akela's head and 4 quarters, and Mowgli dropped on his knees beside the Lone Wolf. "Said I not it would be my last fight?" Akela gasped. "It is good hunting. And thou, Little Brother?" "I live, having killed many." "Even so I die, and I would die by thee, Little Brother." Mowgli took the terrible scarred head on his knees, and put his arms round the torn neck. "It is long since the days of Shere Khan, and a man cub that rolled naked in the dust." "Nay, nay, I am a wolf. I am of one skin with the Free People," Mowgli cried. "It is no will of mine that I am a man." "Thou art a man, Little Brother, wolfing of my watching. Thou art a man, or else the Pack had fled before the dhole. My life I owe to thee, and today thou hast saved the Pack even as once I saved thee. Hast thou forgotten? All debts are paid now. Go to thine own people. I tell thee again, eye of my eye, this hunting is ended. Go to thine own people." "I will never go. I will hunt alone in the Jungle. I have said it. After the summer come the rains, and after the rains come the spring. Go back before thou art driven." "Who will drive me?" "Mowgli will drive Mowgli. Go back to thy people. Go to Man." "When Mowgli drives Mowgli I will go. Mowgli answered. "There is no more to say," said Akela. "Little brother, canst thou raise me to my feet? I also was a leader of the Free People." Very carefully and gently Mowgli lifted the bodies aside, and raised Akela to his feet, both arms round him, and the Lone Wolf drew a long breath, and began the death song that a leader of the Pack should sing when he dies. It gathered strength as he went on, lifting and ringing far across the river, till it came to the last "Good hunting." And Akela shook himself clear of Mowgli for an instant, and leaping into the air, fell backward dead upon his last and most terrible kill. Mowgli sat with his head on his knees, careless of anything else, while the remnant of the flying dholes were being overtaken and run down by the merciless lahinis. Little by little the cries died away, and the wolves returned limping, as their wounds stiffened, to take stock of the losses. 15 of the Pack, as well as half a dozen lahinis, lay dead by the river, and of the others not one was unmarked. And Mowgli sat through it all till the cold daybreak, when Phayow's wet, red muzzle was dropped in his hand, and Mowgli drew back to show the gaunt body of Akela. "Good hunting," said Phayah, as though Akela were still alive, and then over his bitten shoulder to the others, "Howl, dogs! A wolf has died tonight." But of all the Pack of 200 fighting dholes, whose boast was that all jungles were their jungle, and that no living thing could stand before them, not one returned to the Dekkan to carry that word. End of